Good evening, I'm Jim Lara. On the NewsHour tonight, the news of this Thursday, then more on the impact of the financial meltdown and the crisis of confidence about Wall Street. Plus, the troubled Washington, D.C. schools. Another report from John Merrow.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lara is provided by
Pacific Life has been the power behind successful individuals for more than 140 years. Pacific Life's strength includes assets exceeding $100 billion. So when it comes to planning for retirement, your financial professional and Pacific Life can help you reach your goals. Pacific Life, the power to help you succeed.
With soaring energy prices and global climate change, there are good reasons for believing in wind. Wind energy is clean and plentiful, and it answers the call for sustainable ways to create the electricity we need. We know because our sole focus is developing technology that uses the energy of the wind to generate electricity. America has some of the world's most abundant wind resources, and Vestas is here to help harness them.
Chevron.
The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, working to solve social and environmental problems at home and around the world.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions and foundations. And
this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Wall Street roared back to life today. Stocks rallied on late reports that a new agency might be formed to handle the bad debts of banks. Treasury Secretary Paulson was said to be discussing the idea with Congress. It would be modeled after the Resolution Trust Corporation that cleaned up the savings and loan mess 20 years ago. The news pushed the Dow Jones Industrial Average back up 410 points to close at 11,019. The NASDAQ rose 100 points to close at 2199. The gains erased most of yesterday's losses. Financial and political leaders spent much of this day trying to restore calm. The Federal Reserve and its counterparts in Europe and Japan were first to act. They added more than $200 billion to the global banking system to ease credit. Hours later, President Bush said Americans can rest assured the government is taking extraordinary measures. But congressional leaders on both sides raised objections. House Speaker Pelosi said the president needed to say more.
Just the brevity of the president's statement. We wondered if he was ever going to come out of hiding on this subject. He came out in 1 minute and said very little. What was expected was an explanation to the American people of what is happening because it has a direct impact on their lives. What would be hoped for would be an apology to the American people for the situation that we are in.
A number of Republicans joined in questioning federal bailouts for major companies. House Minority Leader Boehner complained the administration is not explaining its actions to Congress.
We are a separate branch of our government. Members are entitled to information. And I understand that there's a lot of sensitive talks underway. This is unprecedented. But having said that, members of Congress have a responsibility to their constituents and to the American taxpayers to have a better understanding of what's happening.
Democrats said they plan hearings later this month to get answers about the various bailouts and about what's coming next. We'll have more on the financial crisis and efforts to restore calm right after this news summary. In the presidential campaign today, Republican John McCain called for firing the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission. He said Christopher Cox, a former Republican congressman, betrayed the public trust in his oversight role. Democrat Barack Obama said the real answer is to get rid of the Bush administration and its economic policies. We'll have more on the campaign later in the program tonight. The financial turbulence rippled around the world again today. Markets across Europe and Asia were mixed, and the British bank Lloyds TBS bought the country's largest mortgage lender, HBOS. We have a report on events in Europe from Juliette Bremner of Independent Television News.
Two against tenure. I give a flag. Two against tenure.
Into the fray for a fourth day running. Traders at BGC Partners in Canary Wharf were waiting to see which way the financial roller coaster would fling them today. The FTSE share index opened at 4912. Would the British bank merger be enough to steady the market? The competition rulebook had been torn up in favour of financial stability.
It's just very difficult. All the markets are all over the place. Nobody knows exactly what they're doing, so it's a bit panicky.
Initially, it had a soothing effect in London, mirrored across other European exchanges, all creeping up. By midday, the FTSE was up above 5,000 for the first time since this crisis reshaped our financial world. The biggest boost, led by the US Federal Reserve, came when central banks around the world agreed to a massive injection of credit. Within half an hour of opening, the Dow was up by more than 150 points. That's exactly what the central banks will have hoped for when they pumped close to $200 billion into the system. It was close to seizing up through lack of credit. And what they have done, in effect, is oil the international wheels of finance. The London Stock Exchange closed slightly down, but showed signs of calmer nerves.
I think it's been a retrenchment day, of dusting oneself down, because we've taken an absolute clattering this week. And until this morning, the FTSE was down 9.7% in 3 trading days, which is the biggest fall that's been recorded since the crash in 1987.
But they headed home fearful that tomorrow could bring more bad news, more market turmoil.
In Russia, the government kept markets closed for a second day to enforce calm. They're due to reopen tomorrow. Fallout from all the turmoil sent the price of gold up sharply again today. It traded above $900 an ounce for a time. And the U.S. House approved curbs on speculation in major commodities, especially oil. It now goes to the Senate, but it faces a presidential veto threat. The city of Galveston, Texas today abandoned plans to let people return even briefly in wake of Hurricane Ike. City officials cited limited power and water and continuing sewer problems. Instead, Mayor Lyda Ann Thomas said residents could be allowed back in about 7 to 10 days after basic services are restored.
By staying away and being patient, you are making it possible for us to get you home in a week or so instead of the months it would take if the city's infrastructure were more overwhelmed at this point.
In Houston, traffic picked up today, but many thousands of homes and businesses remained in the dark 5 days after the hurricane hit. Officials also reported 56 deaths are now blamed on the storm. 7 U.S. soldiers died in a helicopter crash in southern Iraq today. The Chinook helicopter went down on the desert west of Basra just after midnight. U.S. officials said it appeared to be an accident caused by a mechanical problem. In another development, Defense Secretary Gates said the U.S. war strategy in Afghanistan is now under review. He cited escalating violence and the resurgent Taliban. The State Department today confirmed an American died in Wednesday's attack at the U.S. Embassy in Yemen. The 18-year-old woman from Lackawanna, New York, was among 16 people killed. Security officials in Yemen said today they've arrested some 25 suspects with links to al-Qaeda. U.S. Secretary of State Rice today leveled some of her toughest talk yet at the Russians. She warned the recent invasion of Georgia or similar moves would achieve no enduring strategic objective, and she pressed Western nations to stand up to Russian aggression.
Our strategic goal now is to make clear to Russia's leaders that their choices could put Russia on a one-way path to self-imposed isolation and international irrelevance. We cannot afford to validate the prejudices that some Russian leaders seem to have, that if you press free nations hard enough, if you bully them and you threaten them and you lash out, they will cave in and they'll forget, and eventually they will concede.
Rice also dismissed Russian moves to send 2 long-range bombers and a nuclear battlecruiser on missions to Venezuela. That country's leftist president, Hugo Chavez, is an outspoken opponent of U.S. policy. A new bridge opened today in Minneapolis to replace one that collapsed last year. The old span fell into the Mississippi River in August of 2007, killing 13 people, injuring 145 more. Today, traffic streamed across the new bridge. Before dawn, it officially reopened, one of the busiest traffic arteries in the Twin Cities. The project cost $234 million. Construction was fast-tracked, and contractors finished 3 months ahead of time to get a bonus of more than $20 million. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now the financial crisis, confidence, the candidates, and Main Street, plus the latest on the Washington, D.C. schools. Another day in the financial crisis. The day began with an appearance by President Bush. NewsHour correspondent Kwame Holman has our report.
The American people are concerned.
The president spoke shortly after the markets opened, having canceled travel to political fundraisers in order to remain in Washington for more talks with his economic team.
In recent weeks, the federal government has taken extraordinary measures to address the challenges confronting our financial markets. We've taken control of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the home finance agencies, to help promote market stability and to ensure they can continue to play a role in helping our housing market recover. This week, the Federal Reserve acted to prevent the disorderly failure of the insurance company AIG, a development that could have caused a severe disruption in our financial markets and threatened other sectors of the economy. Yesterday, the Securities and Exchange Commission took action to strengthen investor protections and step up its enforcement actions against illegal market manipulation. Last night, the Federal Reserve, in coordination with central banks around the world, took a substantial step to provide additional liquidity to the U.S. financial system. These actions are necessary and they're important, and the markets are adjusting to them. Our financial markets continue to deal with serious challenges. As our recent actions demonstrate, my administration is focused on meeting these challenges. The American people can be sure we will continue to act to strengthen and stabilize our financial markets and improve investor confidence.
Last night, the Federal Reserve, along with central banks overseas, flooded currency markets with more than $200 billion in an attempt to spur skittish banks to begin lending again. It was the latest action in a tumultuous 10 days for world financial markets that's seen a paralysis in the ready availability of credit. In just more than a week, one of the storied names of Wall Street, Lehman Brothers, was left for dead, and the government took control of the nation's largest mortgage and insurance brokers. Last week, the government took over giant mortgage brokers Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, a move that puts U.S. taxpayers on the line for up to $200 billion. Tuesday night, the Federal Reserve made an emergency $85 billion loan to American International Group, or AIG, to save the insurance company from insolvency. The government took a nearly 80% stake in the company. The breakneck pace and enormous potential costs have brought varied reactions on Capitol Hill, ranging from wary acceptance to outrage. Some Republican House conservatives came down in the latter category. Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota.
All our heads are spinning right now with the bailout mania. First, we were told that Bear Stearns was too big to fail. Then we were told that Freddie, Fannie were too big to fail. Then we were told that AIG was too big to fail. What's next? Starbucks, too big to fail.
Texan Jeb Henserling.
Enough is enough. It is time to bail out the American taxpayer. Today, House conservatives are calling upon the Treasury, the Fed, and Congress to end the bailouts.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi placed the blame for the present crisis squarely with the president.
What we really need now is confidence, and confidence is hard to come by at a time when there's so much bad news emerging from our financial markets. What we have now is a man-made disaster, a disaster that comes from the Bush failed policies, a failure of the Bush administration to steward our economy in a responsible way.
Pelosi echoed a critique from her Republican counterpart that the AIG bailout is too costly. She also criticized a lack of consultation with Congress about the measures and the power exercised by the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke.
Why does one person without criteria and transparency have the ability to grant $85 billion in a bailout without the scrutiny, the transparency that the American people deserve? And how does this work? I mean, can the private say, this is a private company, can they just run wild? Again, anything goes, and when they fail, they're too big to fail, and the taxpayer pays the price.
As Wall Street trading drew to a close this afternoon, markets soared after reports of a possible new federal intervention to deal with billions of dollars of bad housing debt.
The presidential candidates also continued to weigh in on the latest Wall Street developments. Judy Woodruff reports.
With a pair of new polls indicating Barack Obama has erased John McCain's post-convention bounce, both nominees and their running mates took to battleground states today, with all four stressing the issue foremost on voters' minds, the economy. One survey by the New York Times and CBS News puts Obama ahead by 5 points, 48 to 43. Just 10 days ago, the same poll had McCain with a 2-point lead. A Quinnipiac University survey, meanwhile, has Obama up 4 points, 49 to 45. Democrat Joe Biden campaigned this morning at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio.
So, folks, John McCain literally stands alone now. Even with Bush, stands alone now in saying the economy and the fundamentals are strong. He is totally out of touch.
Earlier, Biden appeared on ABC's Good Morning America and contrasted his and Obama's tax plan with John McCain's.
We want to take money and put it back in the pocket of middle-class people.
Anybody making over $250,000 is going to pay more.
You got it. It's time to be patriotic, Kate. Time to jump in. Time to be part of the deal. Time to help get America out of the rut. And the way to do that is they're still going to pay less taxes than they paid under Reagan.
McCain and Palin jumped on Biden's comment during a rally together in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Palin went first.
Our opponents, they have some strange ideas about raising taxes. To them, raising taxes, and Joe Biden said it again today, raising taxes is about patriotism. To the rest of America, that's not patriotism. Raising taxes is about killing jobs and hurting small businesses and making things worse. This isn't about anyone's patriotism. It's about Barack Obama's poor judgment.
McCain followed.
Today, Senator Obama's running mate said that raising taxes is patriotic. Raising taxes in a tough economy isn't patriotic. It's not a badge of honor. It's just plain dumb.
McCain today called for the creation of a mortgage and financial institutions trust and said if he were president, he would fire Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman Christopher Cox. He also slammed Obama's response to the current financial turmoil, including yesterday's bailout of insurance giant AIG.
Senator Obama's own advisors are saying that the crisis will benefit him politically. My friends, that's the kind of me first, country second politics that are broken in Washington. My opponent sees an economic crisis as a political opportunity instead of a time to lead. Senator Obama isn't change. He's part of the problem in Washington. When AIG was bailed out, I didn't like it, but I understood it needed to be done to protect hardworking Americans with insurance policies and annuities. Senator Obama didn't take a position. On the biggest issue of the day, he didn't know what to think. He may not realize it, but you don't get to vote present as President of the United States.
Obama responded to the criticism at a rally in Española, New Mexico, saying McCain's change in position on AIG was confusing.
John McCain can't decide whether he's Barry Goldwater or Dennis Kucinich. He's not clear about what he thinks or what he believes. Well, I have a message for Senator McCain. You cannot just run away from your long-held views or your lifelong record. You can't erase 26 years of support for the very policies and people who helped to bring in some of the problems that we're seeing. You can't just erase all that with 1 week worth of rants.
Obama also announced a plan called the Homeowner and Financial Support Act that he said would accomplish 3 goals.
First, we will provide capital to the financial system. Second, we will provide liquidity to enable our financial markets to function. And third, we will do what I've been calling for since I supported legislation on it early last spring, which is to get serious about helping struggling families to restructure their mortgages on affordable terms so they can stay in their homes.
Both nominees will campaign in battleground states again tomorrow. Obama in Florida, McCain in Minnesota.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Now more on the crisis of confidence issue and Ray Suarez.
The past 2 weeks have seen some extraordinary and unprecedented moves by the government to deal with that crisis, and there may be more to come. For some perspective, we turn to 2 people who've helped manage the economy in senior government posts. Alan Blinder was vice chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve and a member of President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors. He's now a professor of economics at Princeton University and an advisor to Senator Barack Obama. And Peter Wallison was general counsel of the Treasury Department in the Reagan administration. He's now a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and an advisor to Senator John McCain. Professor Blinder, let me start with you. What role should political leaders and their appointees play in calming what may turn into a panic?
Well, I think you've got many roles. The first is getting out there and out front, saying something, trying to restore confidence, explaining to people what the government's doing and what indeed it might do, and why. The why is pretty important. We've had not very much of that from President Bush, as you know. We've had more from Secretary Paulson, but still very much not enough. But talk's not enough. The government's going to have to do something. It's been proceeding on a sort of an ad hoc basis, one company this, one company that. I think people are not really perceiving a pattern there, and I think the time has come to do something major, something that looks like it's going to put up a levee to stop the flood.
Peter Wallison, what is the role of government leadership at a time of economic crisis, and have we seen it in the past week?
Yes, I think we have seen it, actually. These choices that are made by people at the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve are made for the purpose of getting our economy back in a stable condition. Right now, we have a terrible crisis of confidence. Investors are afraid that many firms are going to fail, and as a result, they are on the verge of pulling their money out of these investments. And what I think Secretary Paulson and Chairman Bernanke are trying to do is say to investors, hold on a second, hold on. Think this through. These companies are not insolvent. This panic is the sort of thing that can be stopped if people will just stop for a minute and think about the excellent financial condition in which the Goldman Sachses and the Morgan Stanleys and a number of banks are in together. If everyone who is an investor or a lender runs for the door at the same time, no financial institution can survive. So the objective here is to provide enough cash and a sense that the government is standing by if necessary, so that investors will stop and realize that they ought to look at this thing more rationally.
More specifically, what's the president's role? You heard Professor Blinder suggest that President Bush has not, in his view, lived up to it. What about you? What have you seen?
Well, I've seen the president make these statements, but he's backing his Secretary of the Treasury and the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and in fact, he should. They are the experts. This is a financial market problem. This is not actually an economy problem. The real economy has grown 3.3% in the last quarter. It's an important fact to know. Our economy is doing reasonably well, despite the fact that there have been some losses of jobs. The real crisis is in the financial economy, and the two people who are handling this, Bernanke and Paulson, are two of the nation's greatest experts in this. Both of them have spent their lives, one as an economist and an academic, and the other as a person actually functioning in the market, dealing with the problems in markets. So we're fortunate to have those people there, and the president can't do much except rely on the experts in a case like this.
Well, Professor, Chairman Bernanke and Secretary Paulson are on the Hill tonight talking to congressional leaders about the possibility of creating a new entity that would help clean up the debt crisis. Right. Is that the kind of leadership that actually, I mean, the markets today responded very quickly to a word of that meeting. What do you think?
Right. I think we need it. Now, it can take a number of forms, and indeed it may be more than one institution. I've been saying for a long time, going back to January, that it looks like we were going to need something like, say, something similar to the RTC that cleaned up the savings and loan debacle. It wouldn't be exactly the same because the details of the two are quite different. I also think we need to take much bigger steps than we did now, although the Frank Dodd bill that passed in July was a very important step forward, to stem the wave of foreclosures. When you get foreclosures, value is destroyed. That then infects the securities. Similarly, when the securities are infected, that feeds back because you can't get financing from housing. That helps beat down housing values. So we're in a very vicious cycle that we need to change. And I think it looks like members of Congress are finally coming around to the view that something big really needs to be done, that tinkering around the edges is just not getting the job done.
Peter Wallison, something big needs to be done. Is this it? Creating a new entity to help mop up that debt problem?
Well, I think that would be very premature. We are in a position now where we don't know whether the problems we've had up to now will extend further into other banks and investment banks. We ought to watch for the next few weeks to see whether what we've done so far, flooding the market with liquidity, that is the Federal Reserve and the world's central banks have all put in a lot of cash so that banks will not be afraid to lend. They'll have plenty of cash. And at the same time, we're giving investors an opportunity to think about whether they want to keep pulling their money out of these institutions or whether these are not, in fact, the best places to keep their money at a time when these institutions are actually at a very low ebb and will likely come back in months to come. So what we want to do, I think, is wait a while and see what happens before we jump into the business of putting the taxpayers further at risk with some sort of large program that buys defaulted or otherwise bad debt.
Well, one thing that this meeting tonight on Capitol Hill does is really brings Congress into the game. You noted that President Bush has had Chairman Bernanke and Secretary Paulson doing a lot of the heavy lifting this week, but they're appointed rather than elected officials. Mm-hmm. Is there a problem with that, having people who were not given their jobs by voters really putting taxpayers on the hook for, those same taxpayers, on the hook for perhaps hundreds of billions of dollars?
Well, I think we have to remember that they are acting under authority from Congress. I mean, they are not acting on their own cuff or with their own responsibilities. The Federal Reserve has the authority to make loans in unusual and exigent circumstances, and it has been doing that. It's been doing that for many, many years, just not as often as it has had to do it during this recent financial crisis. So we're not talking about unelected people making decisions. We're talking about people who are running major institutions of our financial world who have the authority to make these decisions and are going ahead and doing it because they believe that the American people would be better off if we can stanch this thing and stop this thing right now, get investors calm again, let them think about it carefully, and not go ahead with a program that we might regret in the future.
Professor Blinder, what about you? Earlier in the program, Speaker Pelosi was wondering out loud whether this was appropriate for appointed rather than elected officials to be making such large obligations on behalf of the American public.
Yeah, I think the Speaker has a point, and I think, frankly, the Fed is very uncomfortable with the role that's been thrust upon it because it does have the independence and the ability to act. Now, Mr. Wollaston's exactly right. The Treasury and the Fed are not breaking the law. There is legal authority for doing this, and they're also in a different position. The Secretary of the Treasury is the agent of the President who was elected. The Federal Reserve is an independent agency, so there's not a perfect parallelism. As a Democrat with a small d, this has nothing to do with party affiliation, but with belief in democracy, I think when it comes to appropriating potentially large sums of public money to some public purpose, it ought to be coming from Congress. Which is not to say the Fed has violated the law this time. It has not. But it would be much better, and especially if we start talking very large magnitudes, to see explicit congressional appropriations.
But if you're standing there and there's a fire and you've got a bucket of water in your hand, I mean, could Congress have responded quickly enough to a crisis like this?
No, no way, and that's exactly why the Fed had to step in. I mean, when it came to the $85 billion loan to AIG and what amounts, it's really a nationalization of AIG, the Fed did it under unusual and exigent circumstances, Mr. Wollaston said. For other bigger institutional fixes where there's more time to think about it, we ought to be going to Congress.
Is this a time when the markets might make the argument that they can fix this themselves? Are appointed and elected officials even the people who should be taking the lead on this?
Well, as a matter of fact, if you look at the AIG situation, if there'd been more time, the markets might well have fixed that situation. AIG came upon their cash problem over the weekend, and no one else was really aware of the problem until late in the weekend, as far as I can tell. And at that point, it was very difficult to assemble a private sector cash bailout for them. They had approached a couple of investment banking firms and asked for some assistance, and they were told, well, we'd like to try, but you're not giving us enough time. So the only recourse they had at that point was to go to the Federal Reserve, and they got a very tough deal. This is an extraordinary tough deal. Not only did they give up complete control of what is a solvent company, but they're paying well over 10% interest for the loan, which is fully collateralized by all of the assets of AIG, which is a very solvent and very well capitalized company. They hold a number of insurance subsidiaries, which are all functioning perfectly well. No one who is insured by an AIG company should worry about it. It was the parent company that ran into liquidity problems. So they've paid a dear, dear price for this bailout that they have gotten. And I think, frankly, when the government exercises its warrants and takes over 80% of AIG, government's going to make a good profit for the stockholders and for the taxpayers.
Peter Wollaston, Alan Blinder, thank you both.
Thank you.
Next, following Wall Street's troubles, on to Main Street with Margaret Warner.
And to explore the impact of all this turmoil on ordinary Americans and how they should respond, we're joined by Jane Bryant Quinn, a best-selling author and columnist for Newsweek and Bloomberg.com, and Diane Swank, chief economist at Mesereau Financial, a Chicago-based financial services firm. Welcome to you both. Diane Swank, we've been talking about what's going on in the markets, what's going on in Washington, but let's come down to ground level. How are ordinary Americans being affected by this right now?
Well, what we're already seeing is because the markets have been in such disarray, things like mortgages are not only more expensive than they were a year ago, they're more expensive than they were just a few months ago. So it's getting more and more difficult for the average consumer to go out there and buy a home out of foreclosure, which is a great deal. It's getting harder for them to get an auto loan, harder for them to get a credit card. In fact, their credit card is maybe on a shorter payback basis now with a higher interest rate or a lower more amount that they can charge on it. All of that is crimping them at the very same time that their wages have been stagnating and oil prices have been eating up a larger portion of their discretionary budget. So it really is a very hard time for U.S. consumers, where no matter what happens tonight, and I do welcome some kind of resolution in Congress with Ben Bernanke and Treasury Secretary Paulson, no matter what happens tonight, you can't escape the fact that conditions are going to get worse before they get better during this, as we approach this holiday season for the U.S. consumer.
Jane Quinn, do you agree that credit is at the nub of how Americans are feeling right now in terms of impact, and that it's going to get worse before it gets better?
I do agree with that, I'm sorry to say. The engine that people, I think, don't understand that connects the failure of a place like Lehman Brothers to the fact that it's so much harder to get a mortgage, the engine is credit. We've had this tremendous sort of 20 years of building up a credit bubble, and it's now bursting, and it's splattering on all of us. And Wall Street sort of, and the banks create the credit that is sort of the oil that makes our economic engine work. And if you can't get oil in the system, then the system starts breaking down. And so the fact that you may need a 20% down payment for a mortgage, you can't do a 5% down payment anymore, let alone 0 down payment. This tracks directly back to the fact that credit is not being created the way it used to be in Wall Street anymore. And the banking institutions, basically, if they get any money, they're keeping it themselves so that they can keep themselves whole. They are not pushing new credit out the door. And until they get their problem solved, the American consumer is not going to get the kind of credit they used to have either, and that means that we have to spend our own money, we have to save more money, we have to get out of debt ourselves, but we are just not going to be able to borrow for some period of time the way we have been in the past.
And Diane Swank, if the banks aren't pushing money out the door the way they used to in the form of loans, are small businesses, or big businesses for that matter, already feeling the hit in a way that's affecting ordinary Americans?
Well, there's no doubt that large corporations have been hit the hardest, and moving down the food chain into middle market and smaller businesses, we're now seeing that credit conditions, their ability to get loans, is also being constrained, which is constraining growth. Remember, much of the employment growth in the last 2 decades has come from small business employment growth, not from large corporations. In fact, they've been downsizing while small businesses have been providing the engine of growth for the U.S. economy. So this is really a very Main Street problem as well. I think it's also important to know that if you cannot get loans to buy homes, not only out of foreclosure or existing homes, new homes that have not been sold, the vacant homes on the market, that's further downward pressure on home prices, which again feeds directly back into a vicious cycle for consumers who have to bear the burden of that on their balance sheet. For most households, their home is their largest asset, and if that's now falling in value, that's cutting into not only their current consumption, but also their view of their future and their ability to retire.
Jane Bryant Quinn, we at the NewsHour have received just hundreds and hundreds of emails from people filled with anxiety about their situation, and at the nub of it is really the safety of their own investments. So let's see if we can decode all that. First of all, in terms of where they are. What if they had accounts at Merrill Lynch or Lehman Brothers, and then more broadly, in general, at either banks that are now under pressure or investment houses that are under pressure?
I think there's a lot of free-floating anxiety out there that is too bad. They're scared about what they see on Wall Street, but their positions are a lot safer than they may realize. First, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation will pay. If you have any money in the bank up to $100,000, that is absolutely safe. You read problems with Washington Mutual and people are going and taking their money out. That's just crazy. It is safe in that bank. The bank may merge. Even if the bank failed, your deposits are going to be safe with the FDIC. If you have a brokerage account with Lehman or with Merrill Lynch, Lehman went bankrupt, but Barclays is apparently buying the whole brokerage arm. Your account's just going to be transferred to Barclays. That's going to be safe. Your Merrill Lynch account is going into Bank of America. That's going to be safe. If you have an insurance policy or an annuity with any one of the 71 insurance companies that come under the umbrella of AIG, those are all, they're sound companies. They lost a little niche in their financial safety ratings because of the problems of the parent company, but they are still highly rated companies. companies. And people who are saying, oh, I'm going to give up my insurance, I'm going to cash it in, I'm going to buy insurance with another company, that's the wrong thing to do, because you are going to spend a lot of money to buy a new insurance policy. You're going to lose a lot of money when you cash out your old one. You're safer than you think when you sit down and look at these pieces.
Now, Diane Swunk, what about money market accounts? They used to be considered absolutely good as gold, unglamorous but very, very safe. But then earlier this week, the Primary Reserve Fund announced that in fact some of its customers or its clients or owners, holders may actually lose money. How safe, one, why is that happening? And two, how safe are most money market funds?
Well, first of all, the last part first is most money market funds are very safe, and they're getting safer because many of the money market funds have been switching out of what had previously been thought of very safe corporate bonds and municipal bonds into the Treasury market. So they're getting even safer as we speak. So that's the first thing, is to not panic just because one of the primary funds, I think the initial fund out there, had some problems. With that said, I think you have to remember that these are not FDIC insured accounts. You know, Jane made the point earlier that if you've got your money in a bank, you're perfectly safe. I would even go so far, it's really interesting, is that Congress is considering being able to insure even larger accounts for small businesses and middle market businesses that don't have interest-bearing checking accounts, that just need a large cash flow for their payroll, so that they can have more than $100,000 and not worry about it. Also, we had the largest bank failure, second largest bank failure in history, IndyMac, and even in borrowers, even depositors in that institution that had over $100,000 insured, so much as $250,000. At the end of the day, once they went through IndyMac's assets, within a few weeks, they were fully reimbursed all the money that they had in that bank. Since the Great Depression, the things that we have changed in this economy to protect investors in insured deposits, now money market accounts are not insured deposits, but in insured deposits have worked extremely well. 7,000 banks went under during the Great Depression, and they were uninsured accounts. Only 5 banks have gone under so far in this current crisis, and everyone has gotten every penny out. In money market accounts, most people will be just fine.
Let me get back to Jane Quinn. Jane Quinn, we always hear in situations like this, people shouldn't panic and they should sit tight. And of course, they should be, quote unquote, diversified in terms of what kind of investments they hold. But does that maxim hold for everyone? What if someone is, or family's already living partly on their investment income? What if they are nearing retirement? Is there anything they should be doing right now?
You know, it's very hard to be nearing retirement and facing a bear market like this. And this is, I would say, is one of the biggest problems, is people trying to figure out what to do with their investments. But what happens, or what should be happening now, is that you say, you know, the market is way down. I know that. But this market is going to go back up. You know, the United States is too big to fail. The whole world is in the process of bailing us out right now, and this market is going to return. And if you throw out all your stocks right now because you're afraid, then when the market turns around, you are going to have a lot less money there, which is what you need to grow in the future. You need to think about this before you panic, before these bad things happen. Part of you should have some money in cash. You should have some money, maybe 30–40% of your money in bonds. We're talking about people thinking about toward retirement. And then the rest of your money would be in stock-owning mutual funds. And if you have a program like this, when the stock market goes plunging down, I tell you, Margaret, I look at it and say, if a winter coat is on sale for 30% off, I go down and buy the coat. If stocks are on sale for 30% off, I go down and buy the stocks. I don't wait for the price to come back up.
But Diane and Swank, and we briefly from both of you here, because we're almost out of time, but we're now at a moment when even treasuries aren't paying enough to keep pace with inflation. Is there anywhere, let's say your IRA, your 401k, you're constantly investing in the market, but is there anywhere you could be assured that it's, one, safe, and two, will at least keep pace with inflation?
Well, you can't be safe if you're investing. The whole point of investing is you're taking on risk to get a higher return than inflation. So I think that's the first rule out there, is you have to remember you're putting money on the line because you think you're investing in the future of the American economy. And I think Jane made a really good point here, and that is that be diversified. The mutual funds, I am not wise enough to pick my own stocks. I have someone help me pick stocks, and I am very diversified across the economy. So if one stock goes down, I have other ones offsetting it. In fact, some go up when one goes down. I think it's very important to keep in mind here that what Jane said, the rest of the world is now with us. Last night, we had about a quarter of $1 trillion come in from the U.S. and the rest of the world to keep our market afloat. We're now all in the same boat globally. Globalization means we're all in the same boat globally. And now we've got everyone in there with their oars in the water helping us to make it to the shoreline. That's a major turn in events to the positive side.
Jane Quinn,
And
brief
Margaret,
final word, yes.
Yes, there are a couple of things that keep up with inflation. One is I-bonds, savings bonds that are linked to the inflation rate, and you can only invest up to $5,000 in those, but they're wonderful for smaller investors. And the other is TIPS, that they call them, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. Both of them keep you even with the inflation rate and are safe.
All right, we have to leave it there, but thank you both very much.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, fixing Washington, D.C.'s troubled public schools, Year 2. The NewsHour special correspondent for education, John Merrow, has been chronicling those efforts. Tonight, the battle between the teachers' union and the district's chancellor.
Okay. People all the time say to me, oh my gosh, you have the hardest job in the city. And I say, no, I don't. The hardest job that I ever had, and the hardest job in my mind that exists, is being a teacher in the classroom every single day.
In August, 3 days before schools opened in Washington, D.C., Chancellor Michelle Rhee addressed the city's 4,000 teachers and principals.
We are going to change the face of public education in this country.
It had been only 14 months since the rookie superintendent accepted the job of turning around one of the worst public school districts in the country.
And thank you, Mayor Cunty.
And in her whirlwind first year, she closed 23 schools, replaced 58 principals and assistant principals, fired nearly 17% of her central office, and began a process known as restructuring in 27 schools that had failed to make sufficient academic progress. Michelle Rhee's next target? Teachers.
If we have ineffective teachers in the classroom, the goal is to not have them in the classroom any longer.
Just 12% of Washington's 8th graders are proficient in reading. Last year, Principal Nelson Burton of Coolidge High School told us how unhappy he was with his teachers.
It's a terrible thing to say, but half of the staff here ought not be. They just don't fit into what we're doing here, and I dare say many of them won't fit into any program where they're trying to raise student achievement.
Rhee granted Burton's wish and more. As part of her restructuring effort, she forced all teachers at Coolidge to reapply for their jobs. Out of 53, Burton rehired just 17. But what's good for Coolidge isn't necessarily good for everyone else, because when teachers leave one school, they don't automatically leave the system.
You know the phrase, the dance of the lemons, and so on, the moving an ineffective teacher from one school to another. Are you doing any of that? I mean, if you have teachers that nobody wants.
Does that still go on in this district? Yes.
Rhee is staking her success on her ability to change that. So far, she's been able to push through her reforms because of the backing of Washington's powerful mayor, Adrian Fenty, who controls the school system.
Has he ever said no to you?
No. No.
Never?
Nope.
But the mayor can't help Rhee now. To change how teachers are hired, fired, and paid, Rhee needs support from the teachers themselves.
I think there is an atmosphere of mistrust.
George Parker, a former math teacher, is president of the Washington Teachers Union.
There is a belief that fuels the fear that the chancellor's solution to improving education is firing people.
Now, for the first time since taking office, Rhee's plans may be in jeopardy.
Although Rhee and the union have been negotiating since December, they have not been able to reach agreement on a contract. She's offering the teachers a carrot, a chance to earn six-figure salaries if their students do well. But there's also a big stick. Tenured teachers have to give up job security for a year. Then, if their students do well, they get the money and they get their tenure back. But if not, they could lose their jobs.
The way it works now in Washington and just about everywhere else is that teachers earn money based on how long they've been in the system. Right now, a 10-year veteran with a master's degree earns just over $64,000. Under Rhee's two-tiered proposal, teachers could stick with that approach, putting that same teacher at $82,000 next year. But if teachers choose what's known as a pay-for-performance model and their students perform well, that 10-year veteran could earn as much as $122,000 in salary and bonuses. Initially, the money for the higher salaries is coming from foundations. Down the road, Rhee says she will find the money by cutting costs elsewhere. Should Rhee's proposal be accepted, D.C.'s teachers would rank among the highest paid in the country.
We could create a system that provided huge incentives and rewarded teachers and gave everybody a bump in base pay and basing compensation heavily on whether or not you're producing results for kids.
But some fear that exchanging job security for higher pay could open teachers to unfair firings. Rhee is already being sued by over 70 teachers, claiming wrongful termination.
Clearly, we are willing to move into flexibility that is needed in order to improve student achievement. What we're not willing to do is to move into unnecessary flexibility that is more geared toward union busting than it is student achievement.
And so what I want you to do right now is to help give me some guidance.
When the teachers got together in August, George Parker seized the opportunity to gauge his members' support for Rhee's proposal.
How many of you would like a contract that you can vote on?
Taxes, he'd stop raising ours.
On October 3rd, Viva Chihuahua, the greatest Chihuahua movie of all time, arrives.
We got her!
Oh, no, she didn't. From Walt Disney Pictures, the most pampered Chihuahuas in Beverly Hills just got lost in Mexico.
Hold your tacos. Don't you speak Spanish?
Why would I?
Hello, you're a Chihuahua, mija.
And they're on an adventure that's off the leash.
I have never had my teeth brushed before. It's minty.
Beverly Hills Chihuahua.
Chihuahua.
Rated PG.
It's Toyota's National Clearance Event, the perfect time for amazing deals and selection. Toyota is the most fuel-efficient car company on the road today. And when you come in now, you'll get great deals on cars that'll save you money now and down the road, like the Toyota Corolla. It's rated at 35 miles per gallon and has the highest retained value in its class. It's the final days of the sales event. So don't miss this opportunity to save big at the Toyota National Clearance Event. Hurry into your Toyota dealer today.
Check out Rasmussen BMW's new and certified pre-owned BMW inventory at RasmussenBMW.com. Discover the values and the Rasmussen difference. Special lease and finance options are now available from BMW Financial Services.
All right, with the weather cooling off, remember, if you flee to Arizona, you would miss the circular file. Here it is tonight with Steve Dunn.
Wouldn't want that to happen, that's for sure. In tonight's circular file, let's go to Newton, New Jersey. That's where people calling the Sussex County Democratic Committee got a bit of a surprise. Instead of political information, they heard a sultry female voice inviting them to pay for a sex chat. Apparently, a transposition error caused the last 3 digits of the Democrats' phone number to be misprinted. It's been corrected, and we know that because Rod called 14 times to make sure it's been corrected.
He was so disappointed it had been.
He said it was not a political message.
Yes. See you tomorrow, folks.
Fisher Communications.
RoyalMore.com and Subaru. Clicks. More cars in one place than any place in Oregon.
RoyalMore.com.
Subaru with all-wheel drive and all-star ratings. RoyalMore.com. Save time and money.
RoyalMore.com.
A few years ago, bad weather wiped out our crops. We nearly lost the family farm.
It was a struggle to pay the bills, but we pulled together as a family and we made it through.
That's why we understand what a lot of Oregon families are going through right now. Rising gas prices, healthcare costs, food prices. They can't wait for solutions anymore.
If you really want someone who understands what Oregon families are going through, send Kurt to Congress.
I'll fight every day to put your families first. I'm Kurt Schrader, and I approve this message.
Bi-Mart's here to help you get geared up for terrific hunting and camping. Update your gear and find rifles and shotguns by Remington. Make your trip easier with terrific values on Coleman lanterns and Igloo coolers. Great hunting and camping starts with great gear at Bi-Mart, just right for the Northwest.
Get top brands for your home at guaranteed low prices right now during the big event at Standard TV and Appliance. Dishwashers from $198, washers from $288, refrigerators from $378. New kitchen appliances, energy-efficient laundry, LCD, DLP, plasma TVs, and mattresses at all Standard locations.
Join Standard in support of the Coleman Race for the Cure at Waterfront Park. Standard TV and Appliance.
You are cleaner than a wind turbine, greener than a solar panel, purer than a hybrid, more powerful than the oceans. You are a sustainable future, because the first alternative in alternative energy is simply using less.
Save on Sleep Country's best-selling Simmons Beauty Rest, the most popular Sealy Posturepedic, and top-selling Sleep Number bed. Not off-brands, not overstock items. Sleep Country's bestseller sale is on now.
RoyalMore.com and Toyota clicks. More cars in one place than any place in Oregon. We have whatever you're looking for, new or used. RoyalMore.com. Save time and money.
RoyalMore.com.
Gordon Smith has let them down. He voted to send our troops to war without proper armor. He extended their tours of duty. And he voted 27 times to cut health care benefits for troops once they return home. Yet he voted himself a pay raise and gets top-notch congressional health care. We all know Gordon Smith was wrong on the war. Now you know he's shortchanging our veterans. The Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee is responsible for the content of this ad.
Tonight's K2 program brought to you by Sofas by Design.